Hi, Kevin. Are you there? I've seen you pop up in my little screen thing. Aha.
Aha, right, here we go. Can you hear me and see me?
I can now. Excellent
Okay.
stuff. Yeah, I think it's one of those ones where it doesn't matter how many different systems you've been using, when you come into this one, it turns everything off and you have to turn it all on again. It's a funny one. That's all good. How are we? You all right?
Yeah, I'm good. So I've got so much to do at the moment. Luckily, I remembered the clinic was on, so I thought I'd dial in, and I'm not sure what to expect, really.
Yeah, well, I was expecting one other person this week. We're a bit thin on the ground because I think everybody's very busy at the moment as well. So there's one other chap who I was expecting in, who's also doing the course. So he's been asking some specific questions about his project that he's trying to develop. So yeah, he may well turn up any minute.
Okay.
But yeah, the idea of these is that they're going to be a little bit of a free-for-all, that it's an opportunity for people to come on and ask questions when they're not sure about anything that's specifically in the course, and anything about their project, if they've got stuff that they're trying to refine, or general inquiries and questions that they've got. It's just a chance to kind of have a bit of an open conversation. Obviously, as more people join it, then there's going to be a little bit more diversity, and hopefully those questions from other people will help inform everybody's journeys.
Yeah, sure. It's interesting. Yeah.
But yeah, we're still kind of testing it out a little bit and getting people used to the format. Yeah, so while we wait for Benny, if he's going to turn up, if you've got anything specific that you wanted to ask or talk about.
As you know, the first thing we're perhaps looking at is doing another sheltered greenhouse. Now, as far as I understand it, we can build that in our garden as a permitted development.
Yeah.
I'm looking at quite big, about 30 meters by 6 meters.
Right. Okay. So a pretty significant footprint. Yeah.
Yeah. But really, there's two reasons for doing it. One is that just plows through our existing growing area. Mm-hmm. And the second is that it will be good practice to try all sorts of different things.
Yeah.
Because there's no way I want to build our nice lodges as a practice. I'd kind of like to
absolutely
do something first and try out a few things, see what works, see what looks better, and so on.
Sure. Hi, Benny.
Hi there.
Hello.
Thanks for joining us. We've got Kevin here is joining us as well. He's got a pretty interesting project.
Oh, nice. Hey, Kevin.
Yeah. I do know that Benny has got some time issues. Is that right, Benny? You've got to shoot off relatively quickly.
Yeah, I've got to go for a work meeting at 4:30.
4:30. Is it all right, Kevin?
If we dive in, Benny.
Yeah.
And then I'll pick up after.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Great.
Good. So, Benny, you sent me specifically some questions in the email.
Yes, I did. I'll just get them
Thank you for the opportunity to crib before you come on. That's always very useful. Did you have anything else that you wanted, or shall I just dive straight into those questions?
No, I think that's a good start. So the first one is just about VAT zero rating, how that applies to different contractors and architects?
Sure. So it doesn't apply to architects or any of the design stage. That's all standard rated. So the zero rating only applies to what they specify as being within the course of construction. So that's, you could use it for like a structural engineer maybe if it was very close to the start date of the actual practical build. So it's it's basically when you start constructing your site. So all of your prelims, those sorts of things, they'll be zero rated, and that goes right the way through. So it's within the normal course of construction. So that means that if you are, well, the example they give on the HMRC is about if you've specified a conservatory to be built as a nice optional extra on a house, but that they can't build that until after the house is finished, then that conservatory would not be zero rated because it's not in the course of the construction of the main building. Basically, so snagging would still be included, even though it happens after the building's finished, because it's part of the kind of general construction of it. But everything else needs to be within that kind of time frame of the general construction.
So building regs, for example, if you're hiring a structural engineer to do building regs, is that before the normal course of construction, or is that part of it?
Both. So you'd be able to, you'd have to pay VAT on the stuff that happens before the construction starts, but the things that are paid for during construction, you'd be able to zero rate.
So only after you've broken ground on the site, not while you're still getting things signed off.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. I mean, it depends. If you're running a really tight ship and you can plug your structural engineer and everybody in like the week before you break ground, then you could probably get away with it. But timeframes aren't usually that kind to us, and it's usually like 3 to 6 months beforehand that things like that happen. So, but while it's all in progress, then fill your boots.
My site is it's actually a shared planning permission with another self-builder also working, and they're likely to start construction before me. Ooh. If I'm doing building regs while they're already doing building.
Is it so? It's on the same planning.
On the same planning application, but obviously a different ownership.
I think. I mean it's HMRC, which is separate to planning. Planning is just local council saying yes or no, you can build it. HMRC is cash, so they want their due. I would suspect that is probably the safest way to interpret it is that you're separate legal entities and will be treated as such. So it's when you physically start building is when that kicks in.
Cool.
Is the safest way. There is also a new thing that's just started, which is horrendously complicated. It's not necessarily something that you need to worry about, but it's good to be aware of for due diligence for your contractors. There's a new thing called reverse charge VAT, which has come in, which means that some contractors or suppliers, in some instances on some projects, don't pay the VAT to the contractor, they pay it straight to HMRC. So they just, instead of it going through, so it's like if I was to charge you the invoice plus VAT, if you were registered for reverse charge VAT, instead of paying the VAT to me and then me settling that in my VAT return, you just pay that directly to the HMRC. So that's coming into play. Now that is mostly going to be for bigger principal contractors. And what it does is it has an effect on cash flow because people are expecting to kind of have that money paid to them as VAT, and then they get to hold that for 3 months until they have to pay it to the HMRC. So it can kind of mess with those sorts of things. So depending on which route you take, whether you've got a principal contractor, whether you have lots of other smaller contractors, some of that kind of reverse charge VAT may come into play. It probably won't because it's a smaller project, and I think this is designed for larger projects. And I think one of the ways around it is you can you can provide your contractors and suppliers with a letter specifically in writing that says, I am an end user and will not be passing any of these services on, at which point you just do it normally. So, yeah, don't worry about it too much, but it is this nebulous thing out there that's going to be really freaking people out for the next 6 to 12 months because it's brand new, it makes no sense, and it's complicated.
Yeah, okay. And so another tax-related question is, in your video, you mentioned that it's important to keep track of expenses really clearly because some of them might be able to be reclaimed through your tax return or elsewise, not
Yes.
for VAT. Is that assuming that I fill in a self-assessment tax return as kind of self-employed?
Yeah, basically
I
it follows.
claim mileage. Then my business enterprise would be building my own house, and therefore I could claim mileage and materials against any tax paid from other income.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, what you have to look at is what the tax benefits of doing that are, because obviously if you register as self-employed in order to employ yourself for free to do building your house, which you could do, then that's going to potentially have a tax ramification with your other employment, your main employment, if you have any at that point. So if you're already self-employed in some way, then it's really easy to add this in as an extra kind of thing. So I wouldn't have said that it's necessarily talking about the materials, because that is like proper self-employed, and I think that might be a bit of a grey area, a bit of a shady area. But what I was referring to more specifically is kind of tools that you need to buy, all of your PPE. You could potentially do, any of the kind of utilities that you might use for that, or, in a similar way where you can offset your home office against a tax return to a certain amount. It's things like those sorts of things that you can just kind of, rather than it just being these are all subsumed into the cost of building my house, you can kind of go, okay, well, if I'm self-employed, these things I can kind of say, right, I've had to spend £1,000 on tools, or and £800 on PPE, and this much on workwear, and I've spent this much on transport to get there and back, and I've bought this many first aid kits, and
Yep. Yeah. So I am self-employed. I do some DIY solar panel workshops on the side.
Brilliant.
I might well not be doing any during the build, so then I'd be recording a loss and no profit.
Yeah.
But maybe that would be okay.
Yeah, definitely, because it's all just about, you put that in, you potentially get tax back from any tax that you paid through any other routes, and sometimes you can get it gets offset against the next financial year if there isn't anything in that one. So it's definitely worth doing. It's one of the whole, look after the pennies and the pounds look after themselves thing.
Cool.
So even if it's not a huge amount, but if you're already set up, you're already doing a self-employed tax return, then it absolutely makes sense to just record all of those things as those expenses for doing that. Yeah.
Cool. So tools, PPE, fuel, utilities are the main things to
basically
think of there.
Yeah.
Cool. And my final question was, so the place where I will be building is in a co-housing community. My mum lives around the corner. There will, I certainly would have access to toilets and, a warm place to sit and so on. The extent to which any contractors working on it that I get in to help me do or not would be a matter of like working out what feels best. But in general, there's a whole range of costs. I think you put it at 9% of the build costs around kind of site setup, most of which are in that area. How do you recommend that I approach that? Which of those costs might be avoidable in a sensible way, and which ones am I wiser just to go and spend and do it the proper way?
It's a tricky one, because it depends on whether you get any kind of an enforcement visit or anything, or if somebody complains. Generally speaking, building sites are the lowest common denominator in terms of supply and comfort and any of those sorts of things. So anytime that we've turned up on a site and there's been actual facilities for us, we're all like, wow, this is amazing, even though technically they're supposed to be there all the time. At a bare minimum, you'll need a loo and some access to water. Generally speaking, trades are used to having their lunch in their van, and when the building is more complete, sitting in a corner on top of a packing box or a block or something and having it, and that's fine. the bigger the job is, the more problematic this gets. So that's not something that you need to overly worry about. The main things that you need to consider, which you can't do without, are the site safety elements. So things like Harris fencing to segregate it from everybody else, because that is part of your like legal liabilities that is reflected in your insurance. So if you haven't protected the site in a reasonable way, that means that people can't, they have to work really hard to get in. If you put a barrier up and they ignore the barrier and climb over it and then go in and injure themselves, that's patently on them. If you haven't made good enough barriers or stopped people from getting in, then that's on you, because you kind of have to assume that everybody else is devoid of responsibility or common sense, and everything's your fault. So you need to do all of the things possible to stop that from happening. And the minimum for that would be proper fencing with a lock on it, so they can't just move the fence out of the way. It's putting boards over holes to stop people falling down. It's putting site signage up and warnings. It's having fire extinguishers. It's having health and safety policies and signing in and out and things like that, which are a pain to set up. But once they're there, they just kind of tick over. And most builders are pretty used to working within these confines now. But I'd say that's where most of that cost comes from. Yeah, you can definitely bring it down by not having a cabin with a dry room and a kitchen and a meeting room. It's a little self-build. You can get away with, having a generator and a kettle in a, underneath a shed. That's fine. So you can be pretty sensible about it. That's not a problem. It's more the utility element of it. Like how can you make your life easy? What small wins can you make that's going to make it comfortable for your trades? Because the more comfortable they are, the better they'll work. But also for yourself, having an area where you can have plans clearly up, where you can have your sign-in register, where you can have your health and safety box, all of those bits and pieces. If there's somewhere, I know you were talking about a kind of a lean-to section to take care of that as a first thing. Perfect. That's fine. So you don't need to get a porta cabin, and you can absolutely save costs there. Yeah, a portaloo is like the entry level that you're going to need.
We do have a communal toilet down a set of stairs about 20 meters away.
That's fine, as long as you've got permission. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, that shouldn't be an issue at all. Much better than having to use one of those plastic TARDISes. Where we can, we usually build a compost loo for the duration. But that needs obviously an environment that will enable some composting to happen because we take the loo with us, but we leave the spoils, as it were, for the client to deal with.
Yeah, no, we were thinking of that as well.
But yeah,
sorry, go on.
That's all right. If you've got access that's easy enough and that's agreed, that's fine. Just bear in mind that they get incredibly dirty very quickly. When lots of different people are using them. So make sure you're allowing for cleaning it more regularly than you'd anticipate. That's the good thing about portaloos, is they come every week and sort it all out.
Yeah.
But that's it. Otherwise, that shouldn't be a problem at all. So yeah, it's mostly the most of that stuff that I just talked about all comes underneath the CDM, the construction design management, which is faffy. But you can get templates for doing it, or that's the sort of thing that we can help with. Once it's set up, it's a tick box exercise to kind of go through. Before you start, you need to do this would be a notifiable project for the HSE, which is just a form that you fill in online, which tells them what the project is, what the references are, how long you anticipate it to be going on for, how many people are going to be on site at any one time, that kind of thing. And then it just goes into their folder, their system. And then if anything does go wrong, if there is an accident on site for whatever reason, there's certain categories are reportable and some of them aren't. So if you have if somebody needs to go to the hospital for whatever reason, even if they turn out to be fine, that's a reportable incident. So you need to kind of make sure that that's put into a book, and sometimes you need to notify HSE.
Yeah. And one follow-on question from those. You mentioned insurance.
Yes.
At what point should I be thinking about that, and where? Yeah.
I mean, you could start getting quotes. Basically, you need it before you've got a live site. So you need to kind of get it ready just before you actually physically begin, because that's protecting you, the people who work there, and the general public. And quite often it's sort of because you're working around neighbouring buildings, it also ensures damage against them. So that could be from a delivery wagon backing into a wall and knocking it over, and suddenly you're like, well, that wasn't your fault. But the wagon will be like, well, I wouldn't have been here if it wasn't for your job, and it gets really messy very quickly. Mm-hmm. So having a policy that covers accidental damage to a neighbouring property from something like that, it could be something, a sheet applied blowing off your site on a windy day and smashing a car window, something like that. So there are various levels of cover that you need to check, but there's like the self-build insurance cover is the ones to Google. And yeah,
they're called self-build insurance.
Yeah, they've got very specific ones. Yeah, I mean, it's the sort of thing that sometimes that's part and parcel of a principal contractor will get that as part of their insurance for the build, their kind of build insurance. But if you're going to manage the project more yourself and manage the other contractors that are coming in, then you'll need to get that one instead of them. So yeah, when we're acting as principal contractor, we get it, and that covers all of those things as part of our price. That's kind of our responsibility, because for those purposes, for things like the CDM and things like that, you have to appoint the principal designer and the principal contractor. And the principal designer sometimes is the architect, and they come and check everything as it's going on, and they're therefore responsible for the CDM. Or it could be the principal contractor could take on that role, or that could be yourself. But somebody basically has to put their hand up and say, I am legally responsible for all of these things, for the health and safety, the risk management, the insurance, things like that. So whoever that is gets that policy.
So is it the principal designer or the principal contractor who is responsible for health and safety then?
That depends on who you decide you want it to be. So if you'd want them to be the usually if the principal contractor is responsible for everything, so they take on all of those roles. That's usually what happens.
Yeah.
But there isn't always a principal contractor. That might be you. If you're running a project and you just want some support, and you're bringing in contractors, then technically you'd be responsible for that.
Yeah.
But the people who can help you do it, it's not, it's not insurmountable. It's just a legal definition that you need to be aware of and see how that guides your choices. Like, have you got the time? Can you be bothered to find all the bits and pieces, etc. You can get in a separate if you were running it yourself and didn't want to do that side of things, you could just get somebody to be the person taking care of all of the CDM stuff. So you can get especially CDM consultant, or someone like ourselves would do part of that, or help you at least prepare the documentation. So it's there's ways and means.
And is that because I saw that there was a CDM advisor in your outline budget? Is that what that was?
Yeah. So you're always going to have to allow for that cost somewhere, and that's either your time to do it, to find all the bits of information and populate all of the documentation, or you pay a specialist CDM consultant, or your principal contractor will provide it as part of their services, but there will be a cost. So it's knowing, just knowing that that's part of the deal, to make sure that all of the health and safety is up to scratch.
And because I didn't see insurance in the outline budgets or anything, roughly, do you know how much should I be factoring in for that?
That's a good question. I think it very much depends on the contract size. So like how much the whole build is predicted to cost, and the value of the house, and the things that you're insuring. So it's a bit of a how long is a piece of string. It's going to be dependent on like the access and how many things are around that could be a problem, and things like that. So it's going to be postcode, job price, job worth, sort of thing. I think that it's going to be between 300 quid and 1,200 quid.
Cool, okay, that's a good range.
I'd have thought it's just a very rough kind of finger in the air kind of thing. I can't remember what it was on the last job that we did, but that was there was very little around it, so I know it was relatively low.
Yeah. I think that's the end of my questions. I've got to run it in 6 minutes, but I'd love to stay on and hear you answering someone else's questions to the extent that I get it.
No problem. Kevin, you're on.
Okay. Just a small one on the fencing. We've got some sections where we've got quite impenetrable brambles. So I guess we wouldn't have put fencing where it's difficult to get in by other ways.
You'd be surprised. I think there's a lot of it is just about showing willing. A lot of these sorts of things, it's a complete So the last job that we did was a long way from the road in a private garden that was a long way from the main house and a long way from the neighbour's house. There were walls and hedges in between. There was only an access by a gate, which was about 300 meters away, and we still had to wrap the building in Harris fencing. Even though there was no public access anywhere near it, there were no pavements on the roads. It's in the middle of the countryside. There's just no way. But we had to do it, or they wouldn't insure it, or it's just. So a lot of it is just they've made one rule for everybody, and it doesn't matter how stupid it is. You've just got to do it. So the best thing to do in this instance is.
So it's quite a task to put fencing, a sort of fencing all the way around.
I mean, you might get away with it. It might be one of those things where you can look at it and just go like, that's completely impenetrable. If they manage to get through there and are still in a position to injure themselves, then fair play. That might be okay. You might get away with just having signage, or you may need to put it on the inside edge of where the brambles are, depending on whether it creates access problems for yourself around the site. So there is always going to be a bit of wiggle room, but don't be surprised by advice being given that says no, put a fence on it. But for these instances, we always recommend buying some of the infrastructure and then selling it at the end, because you can pay, if you imagine that the job's going to last 6 months, a year, however long it's going to last, and you're paying 150 quid a month or 200 quid a month for it, it suddenly adds up. But you can get job lot stuff off eBay pretty cheap. So I think our total cost for hiring on the last job was going to be 3.5 grand, and we bought it for 800 quid, and we sold it 4 months later for 750 quid.
Yeah.
So it cost us 50 quid to hire it.
I would look at doing.
Yeah. So the same thing can go for some of the bigger machinery as well. So sometimes it's worth buying an old digger, because they go forever, and then sell it at the end.
I've got a digger. It's been sitting there for a couple of years, and I've got to put it back together.
Yeah, there we go. But that's worth doing, I mean, that sounds like a great project.
Yeah, it's another project in itself. Yeah.
They stack up. They do. But it's the same for things like a really good quality chop saw or table saw, things like that. It's worth spending good money on setting up a workshop if you're doing a lot of repeating work, and then selling them at the end if you're not going to carry on needing those sorts of things, because they're having a new machine that's under warranty is great. Hiring them can be quite expensive over the time. It's always worth looking at the cost benefit of that. How much are you going to need to do? How much are you trying to do yourself?
I was thinking along those lines. I was looking at perhaps getting a 3.5 ton tipper.
Yeah.
Because it seems to me there's two advantages. One is that I can get it, if I correct some aggregate or whatever, I can get it directly to where I want it.
Yeah.
And the other thing, it seems like the price doubles when you put delivery to get stuff delivered.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And if you can get big loads, like if you can get them to deliver a 10-ton tip where they just come and drop it for you, you'll pay like a quarter of the price than if you get smaller loads, or if it get it in ton bags, as well as the wastage that you get with the bags and all of the problems that are associated with that. If you can get stuff directly from an aggregate supplier, like crushed recycled aggregate from wherever the local quarry is, and they'll pretty much always have it, it'll be incredibly cheap. And then if you've got your own mini digger or a hired in one and a tipper, it will save you so much time and so much money. They pay for themselves very quickly. Yeah.
I'm assuming I do get the mini digger running. The other thing that seems to be quite useful for rammed earth is a skid steer. But
Yeah, just shifting stuff about. Yeah, incredibly fun as well. I mean, that's a good reason to get one anyway. As soon as I'm a big boy, I'm going to buy a skid steer, which is brilliant.
If I've already got a mini digger, is they that much better?
They are kind of single-use things. They're very, very good at pushing stuff around. So it's a pretty elaborate sweeper, basically. I wouldn't have said you need one of those and a mini digger. The mini digger is much more versatile. It's a lot slower, but it's much more versatile.
Yes.
Yeah. I'd have said a mini digger was fine. I think what you'd probably find is that you'd want to hire in a bigger digger with an operator who knows what they're doing to come in, because what they can do in a couple of days is astonishing, and get them to do all the big work, and then you tidy it up with the smaller one and have that for. Yeah,
I've kind of got a sort of loose plan in my head, but I need to really get that down on the order of works, really. But to get all the earthworks done in one go, or within a couple of weeks, probably makes sense, because you want to do a bit of leveling on the site as well.
Yeah, exactly. This is it. It's kind of that's the thing to do, is to kind of spend a decent amount of time really thinking about how many jobs can you achieve with that machine. Like how can you make the best use? How can you change or manipulate your schedule and the order that everything's going to go in and your critical path to make sure that you get the best use out of it? Because it's going to be like, you can easily spend 2 weeks to a month, clearing all of the site, getting all of your levels in, digging any footings that you need to do, driving any posts or poles or any of those sorts of things. Moving big bits of material around, so stockpiling. You could get ahead of the thing and go, well, I'm going to need 6 loads of this. I'm going to need 60 tons of this type of aggregate and 20 tons of this and 10 tons of sand. And I'm going to stockpile them really close to where I'm building now, because I can tidy it up and shift it later. But let's do all of that right at the beginning, so they're there, so that I can access all of them with my mini digger without having to move around too much. Rather than having to have your mini digger hoofing it across site backwards and forwards to do loading a tipper to do the same thing later on in smaller amounts. So things like that are great to do, and then get it back at the end to do the tidy up, basically to shift all of the aggregate out of the way that you can use, or there's loads of different ways to do it, but creating a really thorough kind of job list as much as you can at the beginning of the process, but then as you're kind of realizing more and more about your timeline, you can kind of go, would it have been useful to have something moved here at this point? Do I need to stockpile more? What can I stockpile? How can I protect it? How can I move it around? What are the consequences?
I saw a really good quote from Einstein the other week. He said if he had spent an hour to save the world, he'd spend 55 minutes thinking about it and 5 minutes doing it.
There you go.
Very good.
It's a doozy. You knew what was going on. This is it. The more times you can kind of live the process in your brain and imagine your way through and go, oh, that would have been nice if I'd had X, Y, and Z just here. It can be really good. I mean, nothing's foolproof. And, I say this with the benefit of the experience of having done it all of the wrong ways and knowing not to, where to plug things in is, it's important.
Well, I'm quite good at that side of things.
So you're an engineer, right? What sort of engineering?
I'm a design engineer, automotive. So I actually came to Norfolk to work at Lotus.
Oh, cool.
So I was a design manager at Lotus on the engine side for
right. So like the opposite end of the spectrum from Rammed Earth, pretty much.
Yeah. So that was quite a few years ago now. I left there. So but I've been in design all my life, so it's quite useful, really, in that discipline.
Yeah, well, this is great. I mean, that's going to translate really well because it's very process-driven, technical stuff, and that's building a house. That's what that is. So if you're kind of already familiar with breaking stuff down into projects and sub-projects and creating critical paths and holding yourself to them, then that's going to really come in handy.
Yeah, of course, you can think as much as you like, but at some point you've actually got to make a start.
Exactly. You've just got to get get on with it. But the more that you can kind of preempt by thinking about it in a sensible fashion, the better. And just giving yourself lots of pauses throughout the process so that you can reflect and check your progress and see whether it's not, because that can then show you whether you need to deviate a little bit or make any improvements or tweaks as you go on. So, I mean, the biggest enemy to these things is haste. You need to be patient with the process and let it take the time it needs to take. Every time you try to force a process, something is going to give. And that's either going to be your budget, or it'll be you'll physically break something, or or you'll cause a delay somewhere else, or So
yeah, kind of seems to be my biggest enemy in a way.
Well, this is it. It's the difference between excitement and energy to get on with it, and moving too quickly.
Well, because out there, it's a quagmire at the moment. The land doesn't drain, and that's something we're going to have to look at. Yeah, we can fix it, but because it's clay, if we try and get any heavy equipment out there, it'll get down in a minute. So we probably can't do much on that side until probably April. Yeah, perhaps the start of April. Yeah. But I've got so much to do in the meantime. I'm worried about kind of missing that start, really.
Missing the window. Yeah, exactly. That's the thing, isn't it? Is try to get all your ducks in a row so that you've got a free percentage of your brain available to start overseeing things like that and making that happen. It's it's tricky. Yeah.
Anyway, so going back to the greenhouse, have you built anything like that before?
I've looked into them, like big earth sheltered things. That's just something I'm kind of familiar with conceptually. I've not built one. I'm not sure how the ramifications of that. I mean, obviously that's assuming that the land is draining well, because if you dig a nice earth sheltered greenhouse, you could also call that a pond if you've not done everything right around it, especially in clay. So that's going to be the first consideration. Is this featured in your planning drawings? I haven't had a chance to go through your package yet.
So. No, this is something that I've kind of thought about for a while, but we've kind of like solidified it a little bit in something we want to do.
Okay.
So as far as I can make out, it would just be permitted development. I know
it should be.
But to our garden, it's tiny, so I don't think there's any problem. I think if it's
it's agricultural.
You have to go through building control, perhaps, because of
so you probably would need building control for certain elements of it. You've disappeared.
Oh, our internet's not very good. But...
Oh, that's all right. It's fine. As long as you are still there, it's just dropped the picture.
Okay.
That's fine. I'll continue. Because it's going to be over the 30 square meters, then you will need the building regs. Now, sometimes for these larger structures, what they want to see is a certificate of lawful development, which is basically where you don't kind of have to get planning permission per se, but it's kind of like asking permission, where you contact them and say, we're going to do this under permitted development rules, but we're checking that it passes all of the tests. And they'll look at it and go, yeah, that's fine, not a problem. And then they give you a certificate of lawful development. So it might be possible that you need to do that because of the size of it, because it's a significant footprint. Was it like 120 square meters, something like
that? 30 by, what did I say? 30 by 6. So
is it 180 square meters? Yeah. So pretty big. So it's entirely possible that would be a sensible route to go down. It's more a belt and braces than anything else. It just means that you're not going to get yourself in trouble, because what you don't want is to do that as the first project and to immediately land yourself in hot water, which then stymies starting on the juicy stuff. So I think it would be worth looking into that, which would just be a case of ringing your local planning department and saying, this is what we're considering. Do we need a certificate of local development?
I've got one before on a conservatory, so on that.
Cool.
So on building control, then, sort of things are they going to want? Are they going to want like some really pucker foundations and God knows what else? Or
no, I think it's going to be more to do with the structural stuff to do with the roof, because it's non-residential, so you might not need it, to be honest, because it's kind of agricultural.
It's more like a polytunnel with a kind of earth bank at the back and a growing area.
You might not need it. No, you might not need it.
How about if I put the electrics in there, we'll have to get that all signed off?
Yeah. Yeah, any electrical work needs to be signed off, full stop. Just to always assume that any kind of utility stuff needs to be properly signed off, because it'll need depending on what you're going to be putting in there, it'll need a decent. How far away is it from any kind of power? Is that going to run off? Have you got a new supply coming in for the rest of the?
This will run off our house power, so that won't be a problem. I've just got to run an armoured lead cable down to it. Mind you, I was thinking of running an armoured cable right down to the barn on the site as well, so we've got electric straight away.
I would absolutely advise it. Yeah, what we normally do is we tend to get the new supply, if one is required, run just to slightly outside of the site and put in a waterproof box with its with the fuse board there that we can then run the site off. And then once you get to the right point when the houses are in, then we get the electrician to come and move the connection up to the correct place. It just makes it loads better. It's incredibly easy how quickly you can overload a circuit from if you've only got a 16 or 32 amp armored cable going up there, then as soon as you've got like 4 extensions and 2 of them are on chop saws and you're charging a couple of batteries, and then that's it. Suddenly you've got people, when somebody else is drilling, the saw stops because there's not enough juice. Somebody puts the kettle on and everything stops. So having a dedicated power supply that's going to be big enough to power all of the buildings eventually, because you're going to need that anyway, getting that in at the beginning is well worth it, just to give you that head.
The other possibility is we were looking at putting some solar panels on the barn. We've got to put a new roof on the barn anyway.
Mm-hmm.
We could populate that with solar panels and just use that for the power down there. That's sort of investing in that right at the start. But
are you thinking, so are these going to be off grid?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, they're all off grid anyway. So you've got to scale a system to fit all of that anyway. So I would absolutely put your energy infrastructure as soon as possible. So if your main solar array is going to be, or all of it is going to be on the barn, and then that's going to power batteries, etc., then definitely kind of treat that like a plant room, almost.
Okay. The barn is there as is on the planning. It's just we've just called it a social space.
Mm-hmm.
But as is an existing barn, I'm guessing that we should be able to tweak that reasonably as we like.
Yeah.
So I'm going to put a new roof on it. We could. It's partially walled. We could sort of mess about with the walling on it. I was thinking of putting a big fireplace or something in there, and I don't know, whatever. But as it's existing, I take it that we can just do what we like to it, really.
Yeah, pretty much. As long as you don't alter it too much from its original structural form, by raising. So the sort of thing that they're interested in is adding loads of stuff externally to it. You can get away with some stuff, but it's a barn. You always get little lean-tos and weird stuff happening to it. They're not bothered about anything like that. Is if you tried to double the size of it, or completely walled it all off from being an open barn to being a completely closed off barn, it was obvious you were using it in a different way, they might get a little bit pissed off. Changing the ridge height is always one things that they're doing. But other than that, if you're just going to put a couple more walls on it to give it a windbreak, build some stuff inside of it, partition it off, and create some utility space or workshop space, yeah, you can just go for it. You don't really need to do anything.
Put a toilet in there.
Yeah, fine.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, you're just not allowed to do it in the house.
Have you been?
Just
Have you dealt with a on that subject? Have you dealt with a sewage processing, putting a sewage processing plant in?
What kind of thing? Like a standard kind of tank system that kind of eventually goes to soak away.
Yeah, I mean, you really need to put in a proper processing plant now, and
Right.
we'd need one for like a couple of dozen people, so a fair sized one. But I was looking into it a bit more this week, and I didn't realise quite how involved it is in terms of you've got to have. I mean, we've got ditches all around the property, but they're not running all year round. In the summer, they'll dry up, so that complicates it. You haven't got the running water all year round, so we've got to perhaps put a hybrid. What do they call it? Not soak away, the other one. So I was thinking, really, is this too hard? Is it better to run, because we've got a main sewer on the road, but from the first toilet to the road, it's 220 meters.
Right, that's quite a long fall, isn't it?
And yeah, I can't get the fall, so I'd have to put in a pumping station halfway.
Yeah.
Lift it about 3 meters, because you want the 1 in 40 all the way, obviously. But I was thinking, am I making a rod for my own back by putting the processing on site?
Yeah, I mean the other option. I mean the problem is you've got to consider it from the kind of the end user perspective. So obviously, if you're going for a kind of a luxury experience, kind of eco retreat, maybe putting in compost loos is not going to fit with the clientele. But maybe it's an opportunity, because you can get some pretty classy ones now that are in no way like the compost toilets of yore. They're very clean, they don't smell, things like that. So there are ways to approach it where you can treat your compost, on site without it being a problem, and then you would be able to have a soak away system for the grey water. That would be definitely something that you could design in. There's a really good some people up in Comrie, up in Scotland, who are trialing a vermiculture compost system, which is incredibly quick and kicks out really, really good compost. So there are options there, which could be, a good saving grace in terms of not having to have a pumping station.
We kind of ruled out the composting toilets because of the clientele we want, really.
Yeah, they have, so they have their own complications, and for people coming in for a kind of a luxury thing, that can be off-putting. So yeah.
So I was thinking about last night, middle of the night, as you do.
Yeah.
The pros and cons, and where I was firmly in being completely off-grid with that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm thinking, okay, it's 220 meters, but that might be the lesser of evils, really.
Yeah, so it's an interesting thing, because some of these things we're starting to find out are counterintuitive. So we think of being fully off-grid as being the most kind of sustainable and eco solution, and we've been crunching the numbers recently, and it actually isn't, depending on the situation. So if you have utilities running essentially to your property, all of that infrastructure is already in place. So in terms of the carbon debt that's been done, it's already there. That's free. You've already got that. So if you're buying your energy from a renewable service, it's actually more environmentally friendly to use mains power than it is to build a whole new system with batteries that are problematic, that are, there's all sorts of things in there. So while it's a nice thing to have, and I think it's a really good thing to increase your resilience by having some renewables, etc., and potentially some battery backup, is definitely a sensible idea. If you're approaching it from what is most eco, what's most sustainable, then attaching it to the mains could well be the answer to that.
Yeah, I completely understand what you're saying. I think we're kind of it's a marketing thing as well as a practical thing, but there are other things. I mean, it is going to cost a lot of money to hook up to the mains because our transformer here is already overloaded. So it's a pretty hefty bill to connect up to the nearby adjacent industrial.
Well, this is it. It just becomes a numbers game at that point, and you have to take into account the kind of the marketing thing, because like the whole off-grid thing and excuse me, demonstrating how buildings can work in this sort of way is really, really important, and that has a cost benefit. So, you know, you've got to, I suppose what you need to do is you need to kind of pick a kind of 10 or 15 year period and kind of go, okay, how much is the kit going to cost to install? How much do the batteries cost? How often am I going to have to replace them? You know, all of those kind of bits and pieces, and then say, well, how much is it going to cost to get a new connection in? How much will I pay? What are the predictions on electricity costs over the next 10 or 15 years? Stuff like that, and then start to weigh it up, and then start throwing in the kind of the extra things like the marketing potential.
Not the cheaper option, but from a marketing point of view of the offer that we're doing, it's off grid, and that's one of our USPs. That, you know, so it is to some extent a marketing thing, but also as an engineer, you know, I kind of want to do it and try and push the envelope a bit to I'm hoping we can get some suppliers or manufacturers on board that perhaps want to trial the latest technologies and things like that, things like perhaps flow batteries and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this is it. Now is a really exciting time for battery tech. There's so many really interesting things happening, and that's going to be moving really fast over the next kind of 5-10 years. So
exactly. So I mean, we've got a lot of points of interest, so we can become a demonstrator project for some technologies. I'm quite open to that, and it adds interest to the site and possibly helps with our marketing in, you know, ecotourism and just generating interest and making it newsworthy. You know, there's so many different elements to that side of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I mean, if you're looking at that route, which is a really positive and interesting route to explore, then I'd kind of go all out, and I'd go like, well, what can we do? Let's build a hybrid system. Let's look at biomass. Let's look at, you know, maybe there's a biodigester idea that could get for, you know, anaerobic digestion, which could be solve a compost toilet issue as well. Poo powered houses, maybe not the greatest marketing, but you know, stick a wind turbine there, do some solar thermal. You know, there's all different sorts of ways, and if you can have these kind of set up in a way to demonstrate it.
Interseasonal heat storage. So really trying to look at because if you look at the energy we can harvest through the year, it's more than enough. The problem is that there's not enough in the depths of winter. So our biggest consumable is probably going to be hot water, in a luxury spa type environment. So rather than try to store power, we want to store heat that then we can call upon through winter. So we've got it's over 2,000 cubic meters of underground thermal storage. So that's what we're looking at doing.
No, that's great. Exactly. So any ways you can harvest that energy to put it into that storage, the better.
Right. So where are we then? Okay. So do you have any thoughts on perhaps how you may want to be involved in the greenhouse as a first dip in the water, or
not at this stage. I need to kind of dig into all of your bits and pieces and kind of, you know, get my head around it so that I can kind of see if you're on the right track, and, you know, make any suggestions that I might have of things that could be integrated into that design so that you get the most out of it for doing the lodges themselves.
Yeah.
I'm hoping to start digging into some of that stuff next week. I don't see that being a problem in any way. I think we're working on another project at the moment where they're going to build. It's a co-housing, and they're going to have like a co-house and then lots of other houses, and they want to do like a test build to start with, which is part of the community development, get everybody on board to help build it, and trial techniques and materials so that they can get their head around it, so that they can go on and build the rest of it themselves. So it makes absolute sense to me as a way through doing that. So taking a bit of time to kind of work out where you can get the most benefit with that is worth doing, I think. So excuse me.
Okay, yeah, there's a ton of stuff about different ways of doing it. I mean, I was looking at one yesterday where an inner and an outer polytunnel with a blanket that rolls down in between the two. Literally thousands and thousands of shelter greenhouses are done in China. It's literally filled with them.
Right.
So, if the Chinese, one thing they are good at is finding the most efficient way to do something cheaply, and it makes a lot of sense to learn from them.
For sure.
So, okay. Okay. I don't know what else we can talk about, really. If you have a look at the stuff I've sent, and then I'm quite open in the way we do things. I'm quite open to new ideas and better ways of doing things. Really will evaluate things from a neutral point of view. I'm not precious about stuff, but
cool.
If there's any good ideas, I'll work it out in my head, and then I'll say no, I like it.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, that's it. That's all we're hoping to do, is to kind of like, to go through it, make sure that you're kind of basing your propositions on some good data, basically, and then giving you the data where we feel it's lacking, and helping you make some really good choices. The starting point and the premise is great. There's no problems with that. And like I say, I haven't had a chance to dig into the data yet, so I can't comment yet. But I definitely know that we'll be able to give you some really good information, and hopefully put some tweaks in that make it really sing.
I'm literally coming from a zero base, so I'm sure that there's quite a few bits that are not right or could be done better.
That's why we have a design process. It's all good.
And at the moment, it's kind of just me on the project. So way to run the project, because obviously I can't do everything. So we can have a think about.
Absolutely. That'll be all part of it. Is we can start kind of, the more information you have and the kind of the further steps that you take through the project, the easier it is to kind of start defining roles and kind of saying, well, these are the bits, this is everything that's going to need doing. And then you can kind of say, well, I'm happy to do all of these ones, but I need help with this. And then either we can step in or we can point in the right direction, or, there's a lot to. But all of those first stages are that kind of investigatory, let's find out what it looks like, and just, get everything front and center so you can see it, and then you can make good choices. Yeah.
Okay. How do you get involved? I mean, you're quite some way from us. How do you get involved in different places in the country? Do you sort of work?
Spend a bit of time on the road. So because we're still kind of, as a community, as an industry, we're kind of early in the adoption curve of these technologies and materials. It's very difficult to be geographically distinct. You kind of need to go where the work is, and it's all over the place. Loads of it up in Scotland. So we're based between Bristol and Lancaster, so we've got a good jumping off point for the southwest and the south and the northwest and above. You're nice and far away. I think about 6 hours from me here. The last job we did was in just outside, what's it called? Special Raydon in Suffolk, just outside what's it called? South, where Adnams is. Where's that?
Southwold.
Southwold. That's the one. Yeah, just outside Southwold. So we were there, and yeah, so I'm used to spending time on the road. We have other projects. We've got another project in Norfolk as well that we're looking at the moment. So we kind of tie stuff together. Our kind of normal way of working is that we have local contractors that we assist, and then we bring in specialists to help with. So we'd usually take on like a project management role of some description, so that we're responsible for continuity and quality control and things like that. But we'd get a good quality, trusted kind of contractor to do a lot of the kind of site-based stuff that we support then with our own specialist contractors, and that we visit regularly and do some work on site as well. So it's quite a flexible system. But that's how we get around the country, basically. We kind of build that in, an expectation.
I think Arif said you've done workshops in the past, but you're kind of rethinking the concept or package of how you do workshop.
Yeah, so before we were doing it as a kind of make or break, do the entire build as an educational experience with one set of people who learn the whole process, learn how to build the house from start to finish, which was brilliant opportunity for them, incredibly hard work and not cost effective. So we've kind of backpedaled a bit from that, and now we're continuing with the educational element because it's fundamental to what we do. We want to expose people to the materials and the techniques, but more than that, we want to train the next up and coming natural builders. So providing opportunities for them to come and train on a live build is really, really useful. So we still run them, facilitate them. So we can design them and run them, and then we normally will charge the people coming on the course to do that. So the benefit to you as an end user of that is a lowered cost in labour for having to do some of the work, basically. So it's by no means free labour, but it does have a positive cost impact. Depending on which type of part of the build it's on and how much courses you run, but it's very bespoke. So it's not, it's not the sort of thing where I can give a figure and say, if you run courses on 60% of your build, you will save this many pounds. Yeah, it's case by case basis. But if you're open to and happy to include educational opportunities, we're more than happy to work out ways to do that. That could be, community open day. It could be kids, it could be, there's any way to look at it.
Well, I think we've got a site that's quite amenable to it. We've got quite a large garden here, so it's kind of like an off-site area that you could pitch up tents or whatever. And we've got outbuildings here that have got toilets in, and so we could do with a little bit of civilization.
Well, we have the infrastructure to create a kind of indoor training space and camp kitchen, things like that. That's either then can be used by people, or we can bring a caterer in for different elements. So there's different ways of approaching it. But we've got all of that set up. We kind of we used to turn up, like I said, with a full village for the site. So we'd have a big marquee with a sitting room in it and a learning area and a big commercial kitchen, showers, compost loos. We've got all of that in a barn somewhere. So that is all available to bring on should it be needed. If you knew you were going to be running different levels of training throughout the entire build, then it's worth having a bit of extra infrastructure there rather than having to set something up every time. Work quite well. So there's all of the options exist essentially.
Okay. We'll probably leave it there, shall we? Still quite a lot to think about.
Well, I mean, if you keep on chipping away at the course, if you have any kind of questions in the meantime that won't wait, just send us an email and I'll happily answer them. Or save them up and we'll can really dig into it at the next clinic. And then as we kind of go through that will start kind of chipping more away at the kind of the audit and the different options that you've got for the kind of the practical side of things.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Great.
All right.
Lovely. Thanks very much, Kevin. It was lovely to meet you.
Yeah. Likewise. And yeah,
right.
look forward to working a lot more with you.
Yeah, no problem. We'll speak again soon.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks then.
Take care. Bye.